Hello and welcome to the third video in this series on people you've heard of but don't know why. These aren't the Julius Caesars and Winston Churchills of history. Instead, we're taking a look at some people you've probably heard of but don't really know or remember the details of their story. Not all of them are good guys by any stretch, and some religious figures make the list in their historical context. I expect to do at least 10 of these videos, and if you find them interesting, it would be very helpful if you could give them a like and subscribe to the channel. Comments are also welcome, including any suggestions for historical figures to add to the list. With that, let's get started. First up on today's list, presented in no particular order, is Abel Tasman. Abel Janssen Tasman was born around 1603 in the Netherlands, a nation at the height of its seafaring power. A skilled sailor and navigator, Tasman joined the Dutch East India Company, the powerful trading empire that stretched across Asia and the Pacific. By the 1630s, Tasman was experienced in voyages to the East Indies, the hub of Dutch commerce. His ambition and skill soon caught the attention of his superiors. In 1642, Tasman was tasked with leading an expedition into uncharted southern waters. His mission to expand Dutch knowledge of Terra Australis, the mysterious great southern land rumored to exist. Sailing south from Batavia, present-day Jakarta, Tasman and his crew became the first Europeans to sight Tasmania. Tasman called it Van Diemen's Land, after the governor of the Dutch East Indies. From there, Tasman pushed east, and in December 1642, he reached New Zealand, Aotearoa to the Maori, and I don't think I quite got that. His first encounter with the Maori turned violent, and several of his crew were killed, leading to him to withdraw without landing. Tasman continued across the Pacific, charting the islands of Tonga and Fiji before returning to Batavia. Though he never set foot on mainland Australia, his voyages marked a turning point. It was the first known European to connect Tasmania, New Zealand, and parts of the South Pacific into the broader map of the world. Abel Tasman continued sailing for the Dutch East India Company until his death in 1659. Though overshadowed later by explorers like James Cook, Tasman's name lives on in Tasmania, the Tasman Sea, and the Tasmanian landmarks. Abel Tasman was not only a trader for empire, but a pathfinder of the unknown, his journeys linking distant corners of the Pacific and shaping the map of the modern world. Next on the list is number 2, Confucius. Confucius, one of the most influential philosophers in history, was born in 551 BC in the small state of Lu in what is now Shandong Province, China. He lived during the time of political turmoil when rival states were locked in constant conflict. From a young age, Confucius valued learning and tradition, dedicating himself to study despite growing up in modest circumstances. As he matured, Confucius became a teacher, attracting followers with his vision of a harmonious society built on morality, respect, and order. He emphasized the importance of family loyalty, proper conduct, and education as the foundation of a just society. Central to his thought was the concept of Ren, humaneness or benevolence, and the belief that rulers should lead by example, not by force. Though Confucius held minor governmental posts, he often grew frustrated with corrupt leaders unwilling to adopt his teachings. Much of his life was spent traveling from state to state, offering his wisdom to rulers, but he found little political success. Still, his disciples carefully recorded his sayings and conversations in a work known as the Analects, which would preserve his legacy for centuries. Confucius died in 479 BC, largely unrecognized in his time. Yet his philosophy endured, shaping Chinese culture, politics, and education for over 2,000 years. Confucian ideals of duty, respect for elders, and ethical governance spread far beyond China, influencing Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, and continue to resonate around the world today. Confucius once said, "To govern is to correct. If you set an example by being correct, who would dare remain incorrect?" His vision of moral leadership still speaks to us across the millennia, reminding us of the enduring power of wisdom and virtue. Third on today's list is Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was born in 1907 in Coyoacan, Mexico City, a place she proudly called home for her entire life. From the beginning, her story was marked by resilience. At the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her with a limp, but she refused to let this setback define her. She grew into a spirited and independent young woman. At 18, tragedy struck again. A horrific bus accident left her with severe injuries and lifelong pain. During her long recovery, confined to bed, Frida began painting using a special easel and a mirror above her. She later said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, because I am the subject I know best." Her self-portraits became her signature, raw, emotional, and filled with symbols of suffering, identity, and Mexican culture. She blended realism with surrealist elements, though she insisted, "I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." In 1929, she married Diego Rivera, Mexico's most famous muralist. Their marriage was as famous for its passion as for its turmoil, marked by deep love, artistic collaboration, but also affairs and betrayals. Despite the struggles, both inspired and supported each other's art. Frida's work gained recognition in the 1930s and 1940s, including exhibitions in New York, Paris, and Mexico. She became a cultural icon, not only for her art, but for her embrace of Mexican heritage. Her Tehuana dresses, her unibrow, and mustache became statements of defiance and identity. Her health worsened in later years, yet she continued to paint. In 1953, just 1 year before her death, she attended her first solo exhibition in Mexico, arriving triumphantly in an ambulance and greeting guests from a bed set up in the gallery. Frida Kahlo died in 1954 at just 47 years old, but her legacy only grew. Today she is celebrated as one of the most important artists of the 20th century and a feminist icon. Her home, the Blue House, remains a museum visited by millions, a testament to a life lived with courage, creativity, and authenticity. Next on the list for today is number 4, Haile Selassie. Born in 1892 as Tafari Makanan, Haile Selassie would rise from Ethiopian nobility to become one of the most influential African leaders of the 20th century. From a young age, he displayed intelligence, discipline, and political skill. By 1960, he became regent of Ethiopia, and in 1930, he was crowned emperor, taking the name Haile Selassie, meaning power of the Trinity. His coronation drew global attention, symbolizing Ethiopia's independence at a time when much of Africa was under colonial rule. Selassie is perhaps best remembered for his defiant stand against Italian aggression. In 1935, Mussolini's forces invaded Ethiopia. Selassie went before the League of Nations, delivering a powerful speech that warned the world of the dangers of fascist expansion. His plea fell largely on deaf ears, and Ethiopia was occupied, but his speech cemented his legacy as a voice for justice and international cooperation. During World War II, with the support of the Allies, Selassie returned to Ethiopia in 1941 and reclaimed his throne. His leadership during and after the war elevated him as a symbol of African independence and dignity. In the decades that followed, he modernized Ethiopia with reforms in education, infrastructure, and government, though critics argued his progress was too slow and heavily centralized. Beyond Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was a driving force in Pan-African unity. He helped found the Organization of African Unity in 1963, the precursor to today's African Union. To many, especially followers of the Rastafari movement, he was revered as a messianic figure, the Lion of Judah. But his reign was not without controversy. Famine, poverty, and discontent grew in the 1970s. In 1974, amid protests and a military coup, Selassie was deposed after more than 4 decades on the throne. He died under house arrest the following year under mysterious circumstances. Haile Selassie remains a complex figure, a reformer, a defender of sovereignty, and a global statesman. To some, a flawed monarch, to others, a prophet. His life still inspires debate on leadership, faith, and the struggles of a continent finding its voice in the modern world. Next, we move on to number 5, Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky was born Lev Davidovich Bronstein in 1879 in present-day Ukraine to a Jewish farming family. Bright and ambitious, he was drawn early to radical politics. By his 20s, he had joined the Marxist movement against the autocratic rule of the Russian czars. In 1905, Trotsky played a leading role in the First Russian Revolution, chairing the St. Petersburg Soviet, or Workers' Council. Though the uprising failed, his reputation as a brilliant orator and organizer was sealed. Arrested and exiled to Siberia, he eventually escaped and spent years abroad, writing and debating strategy with other revolutionaries, including Vladimir Lenin. When the First World War devastated Russia, Trotsky returned home in 1917. He quickly emerged as Lenin's key ally in the Bolshevik Revolution. As the Red Army's founder and commander, Trotsky turned ragtag recruits into a disciplined force, leading them to victory in the brutal Russian Civil War. His military genius secured the survival of the new Soviet state. But after Lenin's death in 1924, Trotsky's fortunes turned. He argued for rapid industrialization and permanent revolution, while Joseph Stalin maneuvered to consolidate power. Trotsky was gradually stripped of his positions, expelled from the Communist Party, and by 1929 forced into exile. From Turkey, France, and eventually Mexico, Trotsky continued to write and criticize Stalin's increasingly authoritarian rule. He warned that Stalin's dictatorship betrayed the ideals of the revolution. For this, Trotsky became Stalin's most dangerous enemy abroad. In 1940, Trotsky's struggles ended violently. The Soviet agent infiltrated his household in Mexico City and struck him with an ice axe. Trotsky died the next day, still defiant. His legacy remains that of a fiery revolutionary, a gifted thinker, and a rival in the battle for the soul of the Soviet Union. Next on the list is a figure probably better known by his nom de guerre, the Red Baron. We have number 6, Manfred von Richthofen. Manfred von Richthofen was born on May 2, 1892 in Breslau, Germany, into a family of Prussian nobility. From a young age, he showed a love for adventure and hunting, skills that would later translate into the skies of the First World War. At the outbreak of war in 1914, Richthofen joined the German cavalry, but the age of horse and saber was fading fast, replaced by barbed wire, trenches, and machine guns. Restless, he sought greater action. In 1915, he transferred to the Imperial German Air Service. Flying first as an observer, Richthofen soon trained as a pilot. In the air, he combined precision, daring, and discipline, painting his aircraft bright red, a bold move that made him both a target and a legend. He became known as Der Rote Kampfflieger, the Red Fighter Pilot. Of course, we know him as the Red Baron. By 1917, Richthofen commanded, we would say Jasta 11, I think I would have said as a 5-year-old in Germany, Jasta 11, a squadron that included some of the war's best aces. Richthofen reportedly enforced strict tactics, attack with the sun at your back, strike from above, and always fight with advantage. Under his leadership, his squadron became the feared flying circus, moving swiftly across the Western Front, leaving trails of wreckage in the skies. Richthofen was credited with 80 aerial victories, more than any other ace of the war. To the Germans, he was a hero. To the Allies, a deadly but respected opponent. Even those he defeated admired his chivalry, often recalling his cool precision and refusal to indulge in cruelty. On April 21st, 1918, while pursuing an enemy plane over the Somme in France, Richthofen was struck. Whether by Australian ground fire or a Canadian pilot remains debated. His red Fokker triplane crash-landed in a field, and the Red Baron was dead, just 25 years old. Allied soldiers buried him with full military honors, recognizing not only his skill, but also his place in aviation history. Manfred von Richthofen's legend endures, not just as a warrior of the skies, but as a symbol of the brief, almost nightly age of air combat in the Great War. Shifting to the world of economics, we come to number 7, Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was one of the most influential economists of the 20th century. Born in 1912 in Brooklyn to poor immigrant parents, he grew up during the Great Depression, a time that shaped his lifelong interest in economic policy and the role of government. Friedman studied at Rutgers, earning degrees in mathematics and economics before pursuing graduate work at the University of Chicago and Columbia. During World War II, he worked for the U.S. government on wartime tax policy and statistical methods, sharpening his practical economic insights. In the post-war years, Friedman became a professor at the University of Chicago, where he was the leading figure in what became known as the Chicago School of Economics. He challenged the dominant Keynesian consensus, which emphasized government spending to manage the economy. Instead, Friedman argued that controlling the money supply was the key to stabilizing prices and limiting inflation, a framework known as monetarism. His 1962 book, Capitalism and Freedom, made the case for free markets not just as engines of prosperity, but as foundations of personal liberty. He advocated for school vouchers, ending military conscription, floating exchange rates, and even a negative income tax to support the poor, ideas that were radical at the time, but later shaped real-world policy. Friedman wasn't just an academic, he was a public intellectual. He wrote a widely read Newsweek column, published Free to Choose with his wife Rose, and reached millions through a PBS television series of the same name. His clear, forceful communication made complex economics accessible to the public. In 1976, Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on consumption, monetary policy, and inflation. His ideas heavily influenced governments in the 1980s, from Ronald Reagan in the United States to Margaret Thatcher in Britain. Milton Friedman died in 2006 at the age of 94, leaving behind a legacy that continues to spark debate. To his admirers, he proved that free markets and individual liberty are inseparable. To his critics, he underestimated the importance of government intervention. But whether praised or challenged, Friedman's voice remains central in the conversation about how economics and society should be run. Our eighth entry in this video brings us to one of the best-known philosophers in Western history, Rene Descartes. Okay, Descartes probably belongs more on the Julius Caesars and Winston Churchills list, but let's take a look. Rene Descartes was born in 1596 in La Haye, a small town in France, later named Descartes in his honor. Frail as a child, he was allowed to stay in bed late each morning, a habit he would carry throughout his life, and one that gave him long hours of quiet reflection. At the Jesuit College of La Flèche, young Descartes excelled in mathematics and philosophy, yet he reportedly left unsatisfied. He found the old school scholastic methods unable to answer his deepest questions. He studied law at Poitiers, but instead of practicing, he pursued a life of travel and military service, seeking experience beyond books. In 1619, while serving in the Bavarian army, Descartes reportedly experienced a series of vivid dreams. He became convinced that he was destined to reform human knowledge through reason and mathematics. This moment marked the beginning of his lifelong project to build a philosophy as certain as geometry. Descartes' most famous statement, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am, appeared in his 1637 work, Discourse on Method. For him, doubt was the path to certainty. He stripped away assumptions until he found one indubitable truth, the existence of his own mind as a thinking being. From this foundation, he sought to rebuild knowledge, uniting philosophy with the precision of mathematics. He also contributed profoundly to science. His meditations on first philosophy reshaped metaphysics, while in mathematics he developed analytic geometry, linking algebra and geometry in a way that laid the groundwork for modern calculus. In the 1640s, Descartes was invited to Sweden by Queen Christina, who admired his intellect. Accustomed to working in bed until late morning, he struggled with the Queen's early study sessions in the cold Stockholm winter. Within months, he contracted pneumonia and died in 1650 at the age of 53. Rene Descartes is remembered as the father of modern philosophy, a thinker who taught us to question, to doubt, and to rebuild our understanding of the world on the firm foundation of reason. His legacy lives on wherever logic, science, and philosophy intersect. Figure number 9 on our list is Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall's life was defined by a relentless pursuit of justice. Born in 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland, Marshall grew up in a segregated America. His father instilled in him a love for argument and debate, and those early lessons would carry him into history. Marshall graduated from Lincoln University, but when he applied to the University of Maryland Law School, he was denied admission because of his race. Instead, he enrolled at Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C., where he studied under the legendary legal scholar Charles Hamilton Houston. Together, they crafted strategies to dismantle segregation through the courts. Marshall became chief counsel for the NAACP and spent decades challenging racial inequality. He argued and won landmark cases before the Supreme Court, most famously Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, which declared school segregation unconstitutional. That victory became a turning point in the civil rights movement, proving that the law could be used to fight systemic racism. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy appointed Marshall to the U.S. Court of Appeals. Later, he served as U.S. Solicitor General under President Lyndon Johnson, arguing more cases before the Supreme Court than any other lawyer of his era. In 1967, Marshall broke a barrier of his own. He became the first African-American justice of the United States Supreme Court. On the court, Marshall was known as a steadfast defender of individual rights, civil liberties, and equal protection under the law. He served for 24 years, leaving a profound impact on constitutional law and the fight for equality. Thurgood Marshall passed away in 1993. Our final entry is a religious figure whom we will consider in his historical context. Number 10 is Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi was born in 1181 or 1182 in the small town of Assisi, Italy. The son of a wealthy cloth merchant, young Francis grew up surrounded by luxury and privilege. He was known for his charm, love of parties, and even dreamed of knighthood and glory in battle. But war would change him. Captured during a conflict with a rival city, Francis spent a year in prison. Later, illness and disillusionment with worldly life left him questioning his purpose. It was during this time that he experienced a profound spiritual awakening. He believed he heard Christ calling him to repair my church, and so he renounced his wealth, stripped himself of fine clothing, and embraced a life of poverty. Francis dedicated himself to serving the poor, tending to lepers, and preaching a simple message: live humbly, love all creatures, and follow the example of Christ. His joy and sincerity attracted followers who became the first members of the Franciscan order. They vowed poverty, simplicity, and compassion, spreading Francis's message throughout Europe. Francis is remembered not only for his devotion to God, but also for his deep love of nature. He spoke of the sun, the moon, and even animals as his brothers and sisters. Legends tell of him preaching to birds and taming a fierce wolf, acts that reflected his belief in the sacredness of all creation. In 1224, Francis's health was failing, but his influence was undeniable. That year, according to Catholic tradition, he reportedly received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ on his hands, feet, and side. He died in 1226 at the age of 44. Just 2 years later, the Catholic Church declared him a saint. Today, Francis of Assisi is remembered worldwide as a symbol of humility, peace, and harmony with nature. An ordinary man who chose simplicity, and in doing so changed the world. Okay, that's our third video in the series on people you've heard of but don't know why. I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, would ask you to give it a like and to subscribe and hit the notifications bell to receive future notice of videos upcoming. YouTube won't put the videos in front of anybody else without some interaction from the viewers. As always, I appreciate your time. Thank you.